Welcome to another episode of At Your Doorstep, the show that's all about things last mile delivery, gig economy, and the way of shipping into the future. I'm your host, Kaylee Nix, and on this episode, we're going to be diving in a little bit around where manufacturing needs to be going in order to keep up with consumer demand in the ever-changing world of e-commerce. Before we get started, let's run through some of today's top headlines up on modernshipper.com. Starting off with the grocery delivery wars, and in those, the name of the game is speed. In a contributed article for modernshipper.com, John Sims writes about how many grocery delivery services are now leveraging less than 30-minute delivery times in order to poach competition and drive people to use their distinct service. You can find his piece up on modernshipper.com that details how these companies are using quick delivery practices to gain more competition. Uber is coming close to recognizing unionized workers in the United Kingdom. Managing editor Brian Straight writes how the union GMB is set to give workers some of their abilities to fight for their rights back. This deal by Uber would be similar to a deal struck in the United States with the International Drivers Guild. You can find all of those headlines and more on modernshipper.com. Go check them out. Today's episode of At Your Doorstep, we're taking a little bit of a focus back into the upstream when it comes to logistics and production, looking at where manufacturing is lacking and how things need to adapt and overcome to really meet the needs of today's consumer. Today on our show, we've got Dusty Dean. He's the CEO at BitCadet, and he's also written a couple of pieces as a contributor for Modern Shipper here in the last few weeks. Dusty, thank you so much for joining us today on At Your Doorstep. I'm so excited for this conversation. It's going to be awesome.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Kaylee.
First thing is first, give us a little bit of background on yourself and then what you do at BitCadet.
Yeah, I'm the CEO of BitCadet. We're a technology and consulting company that creates fast-growing digital sales channels specifically for manufacturers. I grew up in a really small community that depended on manufacturing. And like many people, I wanted to get away from it. So I learned computer programming, and that was my pathway to escape that manufacturing job that many people in my family had. But eventually, I got back into it. And I actually served as president of a fast-growing manufacturing company. And now today, I spend all of my time helping manufacturers succeed at e-commerce. And it's a passion project for me as well, because I'm a real big believer in the dependable family wage jobs that manufacturers create. And I really do believe our communities are stronger when our manufacturers are more competitive and more successful.
So most people, if you're not necessarily familiar with what manufacturing today looks like, still kind of have this idea of blue collar work, big factories, big machinery, 8 to 5, punching a clock in and out, sweaty people in a big manufacturing shop, right? But that's not quite the case anymore. The e-commerce boom of the last year and really just the acceleration of growth due to the pandemic has led to manufacturers kind of developing better ways to operate, better ways to work. If you're not necessarily familiar with some of these ways, can you give us a little insight of how those manufacturers have adapted over just the last year and are continuing to adapt?
Absolutely. Trade shows and conferences were such an important part of manufacturers really building out their funnel. And they're having to change rapidly because of COVID. I mean, we've all seen that statistic where we've had 5 years of e-commerce growth condensed to 6 months. Uh, Other industries were more prepared for that. Manufacturers, not so much. They still, many of them still have this myth of a salesperson who's going to save the day and bring in the orders and help everything out. But that wasn't the case during COVID. Your digital selling tools became incredibly important. And you had to be able to adapt to the changing customer expectations, which, of course, at that time was, how do I buy? The only way I can buy is online.
And so a lot of these changing customer expectations have grown from businesses going B2B or being B2B manufacturers to really a need to be B2C. So business to consumer, direct to consumer purchasing, direct to consumer buying. How have those manufacturers adapted either their practices or their technology to accommodate that need to now move things directly to consumer instead of giving them to a middleman like a brick and mortar store?
Great question, Kaylee. Uh, they're starting to adapt. They haven't fully adapted, and it really starts with the leadership. And this begins with the executive team, and the executive team taking on a really important customer expectation. The customers expect the manufacturer to be the source of information about their products, the single source of information. I mean, who else would you go to rather than the manufacturer if you want to get the most up-to-date information? So these customers are going directly to the manufacturers to research and to possibly, hopefully, transact directly with them. There's an interesting statistic from Forrester Research. And when I read it, I wasn't surprised, but I'm happy it's getting out there. It's that over 40% of buyers want to buy directly from manufacturers, and they're willing to pay up to 20% more to be able to do so. I live in Oregon, and we've had a terrible fire season the past year, and our neighbors down in California have been battling with this for the past decade. So in preparation, I started to shop for air filters online. I take out my air filter, I look and I see who the manufacturer is. I look up their brand name in a Google search. I find their website, check, things are going really well. Find the product page, even better. But, to my frustration, I had to buy from a third-party marketplace. They had a link to it for me to go buy from the third-party marketplace. And I was ready to buy right there. Now, what we know, because we're in the business, is that there was margin that manufacturer gave up for me to go transact on that third-party website. And this is part of the cultural shift that's starting to happen. Many manufacturers still think of themselves as, I'm just a manufacturer. It would be ridiculous for me to think that I could sell the product directly or do e-commerce. I'm just a manufacturer. This is an old school type of thinking, and this will not lead to growth. Executives have to realize this, and some of them are. There's some good examples here in the US. Goodyear, the manufacturer of tires. You can buy tires now directly from Goodyear.com, and they will come to your home with a mobile installation unit and install the tires on your car. That's a great example of a manufacturer shifting to meet changing customer expectations. And I think we're going to be a lot more successful as manufacturers if we start to follow that trend.
And so we talked about kind of that shift on the manufacturer side, but there also needs to be a shift in consumer side as well. And a lot of consumers are kind of ill-informed about where their products come from. I think that the age of technology and e-commerce has led us to believe that we push a button, the product magically appears inside an Amazon box, and bada bing, bada boom, it's at our doorstep the next day or in 2 days, whatever. But there's really not a good understanding of how you get product from source to being made to shipping to your doorstep, right? What type of things do manufacturers or should manufacturers provide their consumers, whether that's information or things that can be found on a website, to kind of increase that consumer awareness of what actually takes to be made into their goods?
Great question, Kaylee. Manufacturers are incredibly great at creating low-cost, high-quality product and shipping it on time. But they're new to e-commerce. And when it comes to order fulfillment, the order fulfillment times and the shipping expectations, they're not at the same level as some of the great big marketplaces that we're all very familiar with today. So, there's a big change that has to happen there. Um, you know, from a customer point of view, you really have to look at it as, if I'm going to buy directly from the manufacturer, I do have to adjust my expectations when it comes to order lead time and fulfillment. It's not going to be the same as buying from a common marketplace. Not yet. We will get there, but we're not there at the moment. But you should raise your expectations when it comes to the price, the product add-ons, the bundles that the manufacturer can provide you, any special offers or financing. These are tools that the manufacturer has directly that going through a third-party marketplace, they're not going to have, because they have to fit the model. There's this famous quote, and I won't name the person, but everybody will know who the person is. Your margin is my opportunity. Well, that also works in reverse. The margin that the manufacturers may give up to a third party marketplace, the savings of that margin, they can invest in the customer experience selling direct and doing some great things with product add ons and product bundles and special offers. And that's where we're going. We're going to get there. But let's ask our customers to just have a little patience. It may take a couple of extra days, but you're going to get ideally a better deal and you're going to eliminate the middle person.
So, a real life example of that I saw literally 2 days ago, a Twitter thread where this guy was talking about searching for outdoor patio furniture and being just absolutely in love with this Restoration Hardware, which is like a massive furniture brand. And they're pretty high end, pretty expensive, just being absolutely in love with this furniture, right? And I want to say that the outdoor patio set that he wanted was quoted at like $30,000 for this insane sectional. It was like 3 grand per piece, just an astronomical amount, right? And so he took the time to do the digging to go find the manufacturer and reach out to them individually. The manufacturer was like, hey man, we'll give you these pieces each for $3,000 for the entire sectional, every single piece. So a savings of an insane amount, right? But the catch-22 is that the manufacturer was like, we're gonna have to make a little adjustment, make the slats on the back just a little wider. That way Restoration Hardware can't say, oh, you're selling our product at a cheaper margins, whatever, you know? And that's kind of a real life example of these consumers taking the time to go and to do their own research and to really reach out to those manufacturers and know that they have the power to do that instead of just being, I'm not necessarily duped, but being pulled into paying that astronomical amount for something because it has the brand name or the middleman in the marketplace on it.
I love that. It's digital sales is such a democratizing experience. You have a website, you have a platform, customers search for you on Google search, you pay for the paid search on your brand names, they find you. This is your chance. The spotlight is on you. You have the opportunity to deliver a superior experience. Traditionally, with manufacturers, what they've done is they've said, I'm just a manufacturer. The retailers, the distributors will handle all of that. We're not equipped to do that. And granted, you know what? That's great because it is hard for them to adapt to that. But the ones who do adapt to that and realize the margin savings can go back into growing their sales, they're having a lot of success right now. And those are the firms that I really enjoy working with.
100%. It's so much more difficult to build out that front facing piece of your brand, and it's easier to stay in your comfort zone and say, you know what, we're just the back end of the production, let other people do all of our forward facing consumer business. But once you can capitalize on that, even if it's just a little bit outside of that comfort zone, I think you're so right. It offers such a channel for growth for those people.
Absolutely.
So my next question rolls back to the whole transparency thing. And consumers today have a really, really big expectation from their manufacturers when it comes to sustainability practices and knowing where their products are sourced, what type of labor practices are used. And that can kind of make or break a consumer's buying decision, especially in the age of social media where people are maybe a little bit more conscious and a little more forward about sharing their views on conscious consumerism. Talk to me a little bit about what you think manufacturers should provide those consumers to allow them some transparency into either their business practices or their product sourcing or their labor standards.
I think that's a fantastic question, and I'm going to answer that question. But right before I answer that, I'm just going to take a step back and say, at a general high level, what manufacturers can do for transparency for their consumers, and particularly manufacturers this applies to. Number one, show a price. Still today, there are manufacturers that are afraid to show a price. They want you to call or request a quote because of this fear that a competitor might use that against them, which is not a properly placed fear, because the biggest fear should be a customer not being able to find you and find a price and them moving on to somebody else. Show detailed product specs, videos, and drawings. This is incredibly important for just transparency across the board. And another thing is, show who your workers are, show where your manufacturing facilities are, show some personality. People want to buy from people. They don't want to buy from this monolith corporate entity. Invest in support and knowledge base and show your customers that you're going to support the product. Have a knowledge base on your website. And as I said earlier, just don't hide information out of fear that your competitors are going to use it against you. Now, Kaylee, to your really important question is about sort of transparency in labor practices and the supply chain. Supply chains are incredibly complicated, even more complicated today, right now at this moment than ever before. And depending upon the industry, the level of transparency, it varies. But I've yet to meet a manufacturer that doesn't take pride in the quality of their workers, the quality of their manufacturing facilities, and the quality of the raw materials that they source. So I always suggest that they tell this story. Tell the story of your workers. Where are they located? What communities are they in? What have they done to make an impact in their community? There's a lot of investments that manufacturers have made in doing that. I remember these photos of my little league photos from the 90s, and there's the shirts are sponsored by the local manufacturer. I mean, it who else would have paid for those shirts if it weren't for the local manufacturer? So start to tell the story of your people, your facilities, and uh, what type of materials they're from and where they're sourced. That's incredibly important, and I recommend using video, copy, and infographics to do that.
You're so right about that. People want to buy from people. At the end of the day, it's so much easier to think about replacing somebody with a machine, but you lose that human element and you lose kind of the faith, I guess you would call it, in actually having a person-to-person interaction. And it can make or break a sale if even when you go onto a customer's website, manufacturer's website, and you go to like the ask for help button, right? And it pops up with an automated chat. If you know that you're talking to a real person on the other side instead of an automated person, it makes that experience tenfold so much better.
Absolutely. It seems so simple when we say it, but when you're in the meetings, it doesn't so much focus on the numbers and the gross margin that this type of return on investment doesn't get elevated in the discourse. And many times I've fought to have this elevated, and the results are seen fairly quickly.
And you know what? It's something that we just have to keep pressing on and keep talking about going forward. Dusty, so you've spent a little bit of time contributing for our Modern Shipper brand. You've written 2 articles for us so far. Tell me a little bit about both of those articles, what's included in them, and what your conclusions were drawn.
Yeah, the focus is really around number one, don't be fearful to adapt a digital sales channel for your manufacturer. In fact, it is a competitive advantage for you to do so because customers are going to discover your competitors who have a much better experience online. They can configure the product, they can get the price, they may be able to buy from it. You're just going to be absent when that happens. And the other article is really about old school versus new school manufacturers. And where are you in this whole process? And part of that I mentioned today, an old school manufacturer holds very tightly to product information, product specs, pricing, because they're fearful that a competitor might use it against them, or a customer might use it to comparison shop, which is ridiculous when I even say it aloud. You don't need to be that way. Share as much information as possible. That's what new school manufacturers do, because they know that customer discovery of you is paramount. Them being able to discover you quickly and learn as much as possible about you puts you in the lead when it comes to comparison shopping with some of your competitors.
So we've done some talking about old school versus new school and how adopting new things, new technology, new policies can kind of silo you and decrease productivity for employees, for workers, because it can kind of take away the focus of like integrating this technology or these practices, and you can kind of get a fight between your old school and your new school. Do you have any advice for those manufacturers who maybe are operating in the old space, looking to transition in the new space, on how they can integrate to increase productivity instead of do the opposite?
Number one, it starts with the executives. It starts from the very top. This initiative, this transformation, if you will. I know we hear that phrase so much, digital transformation, but this transformation has to come from the C-suite. They have to be advocates of it. And in doing it, they really have to adopt all of the hallmarks of change management, and even working with change management consultants. Because particularly in manufacturing, so much of the innovation has taken place over the past 20 years on the production floor. that when you actually walk that really small space between the production floor to the front office, what you'll discover is a lot of people and a lot of manual processes. And those people have been doing the same job for 20 years, a lot of times with Excel spreadsheets and PDFs and a lot of manual processes. And there's a lot of fear from those folks of job security. And so this is why it has to come from the executive. There has to be change management principles. The people's jobs who ultimately part of their job will become automated, they have to have an understanding that they're safe or that they will be retrained into something that will provide security from them. Otherwise, what are they going to do? They're going to resist the change, and rightfully so, until it's explained to them why the change is important.
100%. You've got to take it from the top to make everything adaptable. Dusty, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. This was awesome. We could go on for probably hours and hours talking about this, and maybe we'll have you on for a couple of other episodes. But in the meantime, make sure that you go catch his stuff on modernshipper.com. Where else can people find you if they want to learn a little bit more about BitCadet or follow along for some of your other things that you put out?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kaylee. You can find me at bitcadet.com or just connect with me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of content on there.
Amazing. It was so great to have you today. And like I said, let's plan for some future episodes going forward. Thank you so much again. And we were very glad to have you. If you enjoyed this episode of At Your Doorstep, you can catch our show every Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also find all these episodes up on FreightWaves.com and always listen to them wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple or on Spotify. If you have a guest that wants to reach out to be on the show, please connect with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Kaylee Nix. You can also find me on Twitter at Kaylee Nix WX, and thank you for watching.